now I would like to introduce John Carr, who is the co-founder of the UK's Internet Watch Foundation. John is a pioneering figure in online child protection with extensive experience advising governments, international organizations, and technology companies. He has contributed to global efforts against online child exploitation, authored key works on cybersecurity and child safety. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you. So a little bit more about me, my favourite subject. I was on Microsoft's policy board for Europe, the Middle East and Africa for 4 years. That was a pro bono position, but it was an interest. Met Bill Gates, talked about all kinds of stuff. So it was an interesting insight into the way a big global company like that operates, particularly at a high level, thinking about policy across many, many different jurisdictions. I was also then, for 4 years, vice president, so this is a full-time job, of MySpace. Probably most people in this room are too young to remember MySpace, but it was the first major social media platform. So technically I was based in Los Angeles. I didn't go and live there. I just flew there a lot. If I'd gone to live there, I'd had to have got a divorce. And my wife was, we talked about it. I didn't go and live in Los Angeles, but I was the vice president for Europe for trust and safety, and I appointed people in different countries. But then MySpace went up in smoke when Facebook came along. And I've worked for Disney and Google. I've worked for all the big tech companies at some point or other, except Meta. There are some things money cannot buy. I hope I can bring you, although my work has been around and engaged with children's use of the digital space, digital technologies. And obviously I was there as an advocate and an advisor. I didn't always take my advice, but at least I was in there trying to make the point. And I'm going to come back to that because it's a very, very important question for this project and the whole notion of how we influence what companies actually do. I'm not going to speak so much about the justice system. I was an academic lawyer many years ago. I never practiced, but a human rights lawyer, it was my special field. But I have worked extensively with tech companies and in this space for a very, very long time. And I looked at because I was traveling most of yesterday, I didn't keep up with my messages. My phone was switched off for a large part, but I looked at it this morning. This was a message I got yesterday. I'm going to read it. It's from a national radio station in Britain wanting me to go on yesterday evening, which obviously I couldn't do. Hi John, TikTok are bringing in restrictions for under 18s to try and address mental health problems and anxiety associated with social media. Can you come on and talk about this? Well, honestly, I apologise. So Bulgaria is a very nice place, so, so no, I can't. Now, I don't know, but I'm going to try and find out quite what techniques TikTok proposed to use to do that, but it underlines a point that came up in the early discussions when I was at the back of the room about the manipulation of emotions and how they detect and know about emotions in the online spaces. And they know, they absolutely know. And the whole way in which their systems are designed, let's not forget, are designed by psychologists. They're designed with a purpose. The purpose being to attract you, engage you, and keep you there. And that, in a way, is about manipulating your attention, which is also about manipulating your emotions. And don't forget, exactly 10 years ago, the first big reveal in this whole space emerged in Australia, when it was discovered, and then later confirmed, that Facebook had deliberately manipulated the news feeds of 700,000 users to see what effect doing X as opposed to Y had in terms of emotional responses from the online users, and there were discernible responses. In other words, they're very alive to the way in which the online spaces can and do manipulate emotions or engage people or not engage them, as the case may be. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was, I'm moving into sort of the bad news bit in a way now. I mentioned earlier I was the vice president for MySpace, technically based in Los Angeles, or I had my office in London, and vice president for Europe. I'm going to tell you now the kinds of decisions I was empowered to make without reference to the west coast of America. All my bosses were on the west coast, mainly in Los Angeles. It was unusual. MySpace was unusual. It wasn't actually in Silicon Valley. It was in Los Angeles, although later on we opened an office in Silicon Valley. The kind of decisions I was empowered to make without referring to the west coast were what kind of coffee beans we bought, what pictures we hung on the wall, how often we would have social gatherings or have a newsletter for the staff in the London office. That was about it. Every other decision of any significance or importance went to the West Coast for their lawyers to decide. In Europe, and this certainly includes the United Kingdom, in Europe it is very, very, very unlikely, unless it's an extremely rare or special event, that you will ever get to talk or be in the same room as anybody in any of the big tech companies who actually makes decisions about anything of any significance. Now, I'm not saying the coffee bean question isn't important, right? It is an important question, but it's not a serious issue. Nearly all of the big decisions about anything and everything about what big tech does is not made in Europe, it's made in the United States, predominantly in the West Coast. So when you meet people from these companies, you're meeting a messenger. You're meeting somebody who will listen, relay back to head office what you've said, and then tell you what he's then or she then is authorised to say. And here's the difficulty with that. The people that we meet, people like us, tend to meet from tech companies, are people like us. They all broadly share our values and our outlook. They're not evil monsters. They don't have forked tails. But they're not making the decisions about what actually happens in any area of great importance to their employers. They are messing. So that they're doing an important job. It's important that the tech companies hear what people think on the ground. It's important that we get the messages back. But bear this in mind. These companies are the richest, most powerful private sector organisations the planet has ever seen, right? Ever, right? It is absurd to imagine that they don't know what the problems are. It is absurd to imagine that they haven't commissioned and are not always researching and checking out the market to see how things are going, what public opinion is, and so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we don't have a space and a place and a voice in these discussions. Absolutely we do. But it is not fundamentally about enlightening big tech about the nature of the problem. It is about, in my opinion, anyway, it's essentially a political role. It's about campaigning to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they're doing what the law requires them to do. And I'm going to go into that in a little. I'm going to get to the specifics of the AI tool and so on, which in a second. But there's an expression in English, I drank the Kool-Aid, or I inhaled. The idea is that you got caught up in the drama and the emotion of the moment. And I definitely drank the Kool-Aid. I definitely inhaled the whole notion of the internet as a positive force for good. I absolutely bought that. I bought into the idea that self-regulation, talking to companies, reasonable people to reasonable people, would affect progressive social change that was in the interests of wider society. That's the image that Silicon Valley specifically sold to us, right? You know, Google, do no evil. Their project was to organise all information in the world and make it available free to everybody in the world. They positioned themselves somewhere between Mother Teresa and Albert Schweitzer, yeah? And everything was free in the beginning, if you remember, but the only reason it was free in the beginning was that there wasn't any means of paying for anything. You know, when PayPal started coming along and when MasterCard and Visa started realising and online enterprises started selling stuff, it did begin to shift, and now it's completely shifted. So what makes companies tick is money, right? They won't put it, they'll never put it like that. They still play the harp. They still pretend to be somewhere between Mother Teresa and Albert Schweitzer. They'll give you a grant for stuff, right? And often their logo will have to go on it. But fundamentally, what drives them is decisions they make about money. And what changes what companies do, therefore, is a perceived threat to their ability to continue making money. And the only way in which they perceive a threat is when regulation comes into view, when laws come into view. So I've completely had it with self-regulation as an idea. And that isn't to say we shouldn't sit down and talk in the same room with companies. And certainly the learnings that you're getting from this project will be extremely interesting for them to hear about. And part of your job, as it were, is to push that agenda forward. But in my opinion, we should always have in mind that whether or not a company will actually act in the way that we want them to, or would like them to, in the end will be determined by whether or not it's to do with legal compliance. Because if it isn't, there's a potential threat to them, to their business model. But also don't forget, by the way, big companies can pay fines of $1 billion, $2 billion, and they write it off as part of the cost of doing business, right? So not even that aspect particularly necessarily will be terrifying, if you like, for some big tech, which is why in the United Kingdom, well not for us, we've now attached criminal sanctions to our Online Safety Act, okay? Remember 2008, the banking collapse? The world economy nearly blew up, right? Why? Because, generally speaking, young men in Wall Street and the City of London and Frankfurt were gambling recklessly with other people's money. And the system blew apart, okay? In America, in the United Kingdom, I think, and in the European Union, they changed the law and attached criminal sanctions to the way, and that now govern the way the finance industry works. So senior executives within the finance industry pay attention in detail to the way their businesses operate in a way that they simply didn't before the crash. We've learned that lesson. So in the UK's legislation now, not in Europe, by the way, not in the EU rather, sorry, Britain is Europe, just not part of the EU. I will soon have my Polish passport, thanks Dad, and my Irish passport, thanks Mum, so I'm not just a Brit, okay? So the EU hasn't got criminal sanctions attaching to these bits of its laws yet, but that is the thing that will focus senior executives and directors' minds in a way that nothing else does. Okay. That was a preamble, okay? And there is a point I want to pick up, by the way. I may have misunderstood what was being said earlier about not using the learnings from the project. Maybe I misheard. Because this project is fantastic, by the way. It's a really, really great idea. And I think you're the first one I've heard of that's specifically decided to explore the possibilities of AI as a child advocacy tool, as a child protection tool, as a child rights tool. I mean, I know that Five Rights in the United Kingdom and Sonia Livingston have done work in spelling out the principles and spelling out the kind of jurisprudential basis for this type of work. But as far as I'm aware, this is the first project, certainly the first one I know about, that's actually tried in a practical way to develop a tool that can be used, that uses AI or the AI approach in a child rights friendly way. And my guess is that what you're going to learn is is going to be extremely valuable, because you're going to find out what's actually occupying children's minds and devise ways of addressing them. The philosophy of it is absolutely perfect, but the learnings of what's going to make it tick and make it an incredibly valuable resource. I tried to put myself back to 15-year-old John Carr and the kind of things that were preoccupying me at the time. So I tried the chat box, and I said, when is Leeds United going to win the European Cup? God knows, was the answer. So that was no good. So after football, what was the thing that most preoccupied me as a 15-year-old boy? Sex, of course. So I said to the chat box, I'm 15, I'm thinking my girlfriend and I are going to have sex. Is there anything wrong with that? No, anything I should know? So I can't remember how I phrased it. But I asked it in terms of lead, and the answer I got back, and I told family this, was, I'm sorry, we can't help you with that question. I'm thinking, 15-year-old boys, certainly that's one of the questions they're going to have definitely on their mind. But you then reformulated the question, and you got a better answer back. So I can imagine there'll be a lot of learning about how to reformulate the questions, or at least the answers, because there's going to be a whole set of things that kids are going to be using that chatbot for that is going to be very important. So, I mean, congratulations, I've already said that, for the highly innovative and practical way in which you've developed this chatbot tool and have sought to harness AI in ways which benefit children. And I have to say, the background papers for the conference evidence a degree of professionalism and care that's really, really impressive. The documentation is wonderful. The footnotes are absolutely comprehensive and marvellous. And I will be I'm going to write a blog. I'm a blogger, by the way, if you're not already signed up. And I will write a blog about this conference when I get back to London. And AI, there are two dominant topics in my mind, at the front of mind, as being issues that the child protection world needs to face up to. One of them is AI, and that's what this project is about, and the other is the role of strong encryption. These are the two sort of dominant technical questions. And let's just be clear about one thing, by the way. There are no AI solutions that provide an answer to the strong encryption challenges. The AI solutions may be able to look at metadata quicker, more intelligently, more rapidly, and provide useful outputs. But the truth is that there are no AI tools that will be able to crack the strong encryption problem, and that is a huge concern for everybody in the child protection world, particularly those like me who spent a lot of time addressing the question of CSAM, child sex abuse material on the internet. So I asked ChatGPT. I use AI tools all the time for another project that I'm working on, nothing to do with child safety. And I very often, I know answers to questions already, and I feed them in, and I get a wrong answer back. And then I tell them that that's wrong, this is the right answer, and they say, oh, thank you, yes, you're right. So that's a worry, but that's because I've been using generic AI tools, not specialised ones, not tailored ones. And by the way, I don't know how often you read the Financial Times. I read it regularly, but in yesterday's Financial Times, I read it on the aeroplane coming over, there was an article by a kind of global tech guru who predicted that the kind of thing that you've been doing with your chatbot is the future of AI. He thinks that the generic AI tools, the generative ones, and the ones like ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and all of these, they will have a role and they will have value, but the greater value from AI tools is going to be where you've got a curated data set that's been rigorously scrutinized to eliminate all possible biases. It will probably never get rid of all biases, but it can get rid of a great many biases. and all possible inaccuracies. So, and that, when you think about it, that kind of makes sense. You'd have to be, I mean, when I check stuff using AI tools, now I always do 2 or 3 checks with all of them, because you can never rely, or you should never rely, particularly if it's an important question, on the answer that you get back from one of them. That's certainly been my experience anyway. So I asked ChatGPT to list, I asked it to list all of the conferences and events that had taken place that focused on the future of AI. That was the first list that I got back. And the most striking thing about that list is that there isn't a single one listed there that's been organised by a governmental or intergovernmental institution. These are all conferences and events that the private industry, the private sector has itself been organising. So they are very definitely hot on the case. They very definitely understand the importance of the topic that we're discussing. I then reformulated the question and specifically asked it to tell me what events around on the AI topic had been organised by governments or intergovernmental bodies. And so I did eventually get that back. So it's quite clear that governments and intergovernmental institutions also appreciate the problem. But the European Union's AI Act is a very, very important milestone, although it's going to be at least summer of 2025, or perhaps later, before it's actually starting the regulations or the detailed way in which they're going to enforce it are known. Oh, and we mustn't forget, absolutely must not forget, that's why I've got a whole slide devoted to it, the one that my government, the old one, not the new one, the Rishi Sunak organised a specific event at Bletchley Park for global AI leaders. And we had the embarrassing situation of our Prime Minister interviewing Elon Musk. Did you have a nice day, Elon? He didn't ask him really any very difficult questions. But they did come out with a statement which makes sense. AI presents enormous global opportunities, potential to transform and enhance human well-being, peace and prosperity. And to realise this, we affirm that for all, the good of all, AI should be designed, developed, deployed, and used in a manner that is safe in such a way as to be human-centric, trustworthy and responsible. We welcome the international community's efforts, so on and so forth. All the usual sort of stuff is in there. And that kind of approach is broadly reflected in every document that you read. I think only the EU's AI Act, as I recall, does make a specific reference to and incorporate General Comment number 25 of the UNCRC, which me and many others in this room will have had a hand in contributing to. But as far as I could see, the EU's Act was the first and only one that ever even made an oblique reference to the position of children or young people. So that's a very, very positive thing. Another reason why I'm sad we're not part of it. But there were a number of governments who were not at that lecture meeting, by the way, and are not participating in many of these processes, Russia, China, North Korea being the obvious one. And then there is a small matter in any event that most of these declarations that I've listed are all voluntary. And therefore, going back to my earlier point, I don't have any real faith in them. And here's, let me just explain a little bit of the history. I'm running out of time. We live in a world of zero trust now. So Telegram and all they say that they strongly encrypt everything on their platform. AI tools say they do this. So how do we know? How do we know that that's true? We don't. And why should we believe them? We shouldn't. And that's why the transparency bits of the Digital Services Act and of the AI Act are going to be key for us as activists, if you like, or campaigners, political pressure groups or whatever, in determining what actually happens with AI tools. Because we're not going to be on the inside. Nobody in this room, well, actually I say nobody, it's not entirely impossible, I suppose. Very few people in this room will actually be working inside a company that's developing AI tools to be deployed in any particular way. Right? So we will have we'll be able to speak from the outside about what ought to happen, and we've got lots and lots of documents saying what ought to happen. The only way we will actually know what is happening is if the transparency provisions of the different laws and the different regulatory bodies actually work in a proper way. At the moment, very many companies are producing transparency reports. They're doing it in order to try and avoid regulation. But why would anybody believe a transparency report that the company itself has published? That's called marking your own homework, right? So you are always going to present any information that you've got about your company's operation in the best possible light. You are always going to avoid presenting any information that might show your company or your organisation or the product in a less favourable light. And when there's ever any doubt which way to go, you're always going to choose the way that favours your commercial, the product itself or your company's longer term interests. So it's going to be very, very difficult. And we shouldn't underestimate it. This is going to be a long-term haul. Anybody in here who's been working on this project, you are guaranteed work for at least the next 20 years, I would say. You made a very, very wise choice. But seriously, transparency is going to be at the heart of it. And measuring outcomes and measuring impacts is going to be the only way in which we, from the child protection world, are ever going to be able to get a handle on this topic, because we are not going to be inside the companies guiding them and making the decisions about the actual deployment of these tools. Oops. Thank you, John Carr.